While there is hope an agreement can be made with the transition period ending in a month, it is essential, of course, that both sides have preparations in place for a no deal. Well, Dmitry Grozoubinski is the founder of Explain Trade, and he fears not nearly enough preparation has been done. A very good afternoon to you. It appears that it's sort of glacial progress, but what do you make of the optics of Michel Barnier coming in person to London at the start of the weekend?
It's certainly better than the alternative, which is him having to stay in Brussels, either because he thinks there's no point or because of COVID complications. And I'm glad he and the team seem to be well. But at the end of the day, this isn't something that is going to be resolved between Mr. Barnier and Mr. Frost. This is something that is going to be resolved between Mr. Johnson and the EU leaders. So while it's a good sign, it is by no means not the critical thing that needs to happen.
What do you think the actual deadline is? I mean, our correspondent there was saying, you know, things are going to get pretty dicey if we get to the end of next week and there's still no deal.
I would never argue with Mr. Parsons about understanding EU mechanics. I think probably what he's saying makes a lot of sense. It's also worth noting that the closer you push the agreement to the end of the transition period, the more you squeeze the European Parliament's time to consider it, the angrier they get. The European Parliament is very jealous of its sovereignty and of its role. And if you try to lean on them by giving them less time, they get angrier and they find ways to come back at you later. So in addition to whether it's possible, there are other consequences as well.
Yeah, I mean, it has to be ratified, as you say, by all those individual states. Do you see any of the individual EU members starting to make life difficult at the last minute?
Again, anything is possible in the European Union. I certainly think that if the deal doesn't reflect one of their interests, they could make a fuss. Everyone's always looking to France, who have been the sort of bad cop in the relationship for most of the negotiations. I think if the deal isn't there on fisheries in the way France likes, or if President Macron simply wants to, I suppose, as a political statement, make some noise, it's entirely possible they cause a problem. But at the end of the day, Michel Barnier won't sign an agreement or recommend an agreement for signature if he doesn't feel like the EU member states are behind him. That is his role, and he takes that very seriously.
The other thing that we need to talk about really is this spectre of no deal. And I was reading out there in my introduction that you say preparations have not gone anywhere near far enough.
Well, let's be absolutely clear. Preparations for the end of transition have not gone far enough and have not advanced as much as we would like them to. The facilities at the ports aren't ready, businesses aren't ready. That's not a no deal thing. Whether there's a deal or not, businesses operating across that border will face immense new hurdles as they effectively become exporters into the European Union or importers from it. That is going to happen whether there's a deal or not. And everything we're hearing from the ground, the tests that we are seeing when, even France pilots part of its border procedures and now suddenly gridlock in Kent, the development of IT systems, none of that is where you would want it to be on the government side. And my colleagues who talk to businesses all the time about their preparations are looking, frankly, more and more ashen on the things they're hearing. Businesses aren't ready. Many of them don't have the information they need to even begin becoming ready. And they are very, very nervous.
Well, what's your read of it, though? I mean, I suppose, you could say it's just poor organisation, or you could say that perhaps it's the mark of a government which won't let it happen.
I don't think the government has any capacity to stop it at the moment. The opportunity to extend the transition period ended 5 months ago. Maybe if the government had turned around and decided they needed an extension 3-4 months ago and turned around to the European Union and said, hey, we missed that deadline, but we changed our minds, can we do something? Maybe the European Union would have extended it. But at this point, I don't think there's capacity to extend transition. The negotiations over what that would look like would probably be more complex than what's left on the table in the FTA, in the free trade agreement negotiations. So I don't think they have the capacity to extend it. Whether this is a function of government disorganization, I'm not in a position to say. What I will say is it feels like active preparations began far later in the UK than they did in the European Union. Businesses had information far later, construction began far later, and I think that was a function in part of politics. While I think the Brexit project had a spectre of doubt over it, of whether it would be overturned or whether there would be a second referendum or whatever, the government didn't feel like it had the freedom to admit there would be any negative consequences from Brexit at the end of the transition.
Well,
and it was only really once that ended that they felt like they could.
We're running out of time. I suppose we are where we are. Dmitry, I'm just really wondering whether, I mean, we talk a lot, don't we, about the three sticking points here, which have been the same sticking points for a long time. You've got competition, you've got governance, and you've got fish. How stuck are those? And what's your perspective on which of those might give?
From a trade perspective, there are landing zones on all three where both sides would get economically what they need. On how politically stuck they are, how much Boris Johnson feels like he could sell a compromiser halfway on fish or level playing field or state aid to his party, and how much the Michel Barnier and the Commission feel like they could sell a compromise to the EU member states, that's a much, much more difficult question, and one that I don't think anyone really knows the answer to. We'll just have to wait and see.
Yes, indeed, we will, won't we? Dmitry Grozoubinski, thank you very much for your time on Sky News.
Thank you so much.